Everyone in Cutter Creek left room for Hart Dolan. Not because he was cruel. He had never raised his voice to anyone in the county that anyone could name, had never started trouble in a saloon, had never done anything in 37 years that should have made grown men step aside when they heard his boots on the boardwalk. It was something else. Something in the way he moved through the world, deliberate and contained, like a man who had decided long ago to take up exactly the space he needed and not a foot more. He ran a cattle operation 10 miles out of town, his father's place before it was his, and he came into Cutter Creek twice a month for supplies and spoke when something needed saying and otherwise did not. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. His wife Ruth had died 3 winters before. Fever took her in 4 days. Everyone told him how sorry they were. He nodded at each of them and went back to the work, and the boys, Cole at 9 and Wade at 5, grew up in a house that got quieter than it had been. Fed, clothed, kept, but quieter. Cole was 12 now and had his father's way of watching things before deciding how to feel about them, the particular stillness of a boy who preferred observation to opinion and offered neither until he was certain of both. People in town said he was going to be just like Hart, which they meant as a description rather than a compliment, though it was one. Wade was 8 and talked enough for both of them combined, and had the specific courage of a child who had not yet learned to count the cost of doing the right thing before doing it. He got that from his mother, people said, because Ruth had been the kind of woman who could say the exact true thing in a room full of people pretending and not appear to notice she'd done it. Both boys were at that age when a child is more instructive than adults give them credit for, because they have not yet learned to want things in the dark. They came on the supply runs, sitting in the wagon bed while Hart managed the feed store and the hardware order, and when he went inside, they crossed to Hetty Moss's place, where the dry goods joined up with a lunch counter, and there was usually soup and a pie under glass. This was the second Thursday in October, bright and cold, with the cottonwoods going yellow along the creek. Hart inside the feed store going over an order, Cole and Wade at the counter with their bowls, and a woman sitting alone at the far end, eating a biscuit and reading something she had brought, not quite managing to look like someone who had not noticed the 3 women from the church circle come in, look at the available seats, and arrange themselves at the opposite end of the counter despite the bench being otherwise empty. Agnes Pryor had arrived in Cutter Creek 6 weeks prior on the strength of a letter from the school board and 3 months of carefully saved money. The contract had been genuine. It had also been superseded 2 weeks before she arrived by a second letter issued to a woman already living in town whose husband sat on the board. When Agnes stepped off the stage expecting a classroom, she found the position filled and Mrs. Calder at the boarding house already calculating what the weekly rate would and would not cover. She had found what work she could: mending afternoons at the tailor's, ledger work at the grain merchant's 3 days a week, whatever turned up that needed a steady hand and accurate numbers. She had enough to stay through November if she was careful, and not much beyond that. There was also what Carver Halse had done before she arrived. She knew he had come through because people she had never met already had opinions when she introduced herself. She had not explained herself to any of them. She had learned, in the life she had left behind in Ohio, that explaining yourself when someone with more standing has already explained you first is largely a waste of the afternoon. Wade noticed the churchwomen moving. He looked at Agnes at the far end of the counter, eating alone with her book propped against the pie plate. He looked at Cole. Cole said, "Quiet, don't." Wade was already off his stool. He walked the length of the counter and stopped beside her and said, with the complete directness of a child who had not considered that this situation might be complicated, "Do you want to sit with us? There's more room." Agnes looked up at him. He was gap-toothed and red-cheeked from the October cold and entirely serious about the offer. "That's very kind," she said. "You're eating alone," he said. "And those ladies moved away from you." No judgment in it, no performance. Just information he had gathered and thought was relevant. "Cole says it's rude to leave someone alone at a table when there's room." She gathered her plate and her book and came to sit with them. Cole said nothing for a moment. Then, "He's 8. He says things." "I heard what he said," Agnes replied. "He's right." Cole looked at her steadily. The way he looked at things he was still measuring. Then he went back to his soup. Hart Dolan came through the door 20 minutes later with his order slip checked and tucked away and stopped when he found the woman from the end of the counter sitting with his boys. He took in the scene without hurry. Then he walked over and sat down. Wade introduced Agnes and her reason for being at their end of the counter in the same sentence, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a child who saw no reason to keep the two things separate. Hart looked at the far end of the counter. He ordered coffee. They finished the meal without ceremony, and when it was time to go, Hart put money on the counter for his own and for hers as well, and she noticed and said nothing, and he did not explain it. On the drive home, Wade recounted the whole encounter to the fence posts lining the county road. Cole said nothing for most of the 10 miles. Then, she didn't get weird about you. Hart kept his eyes on the road. What? When people sit with us and you're there, they try to talk to you the right way, Cole said. She just talked. Hart was quiet a moment. I noticed. He came back to town the following Tuesday, which was not his usual schedule. He found Agnes coming out of the grain merchants at the end of her ledger afternoon and waited until she reached the boardwalk. He had his hat in his hands, the way a man holds a hat when he has prepared something and intends to deliver it. I need help at the ranch, he said. Cook and general management of the house. Help with the boys after school and on Saturdays. Fair pay, room in the house, your own. 2 weeks' notice on either side if it isn't working. He paused. That's the offer. Take a day if you want. Agnes looked at him. I don't need a day, she said. When would you need me to start? Monday, he said. Monday works, she said. He nodded once, and they went their separate ways, which appeared to be how most things at the Dolan ranch got settled. She arrived Monday with one trunk and no commentary about the room. Hart carried the trunk inside. She thanked him. He walked her through the house. The kitchen was functional and unloved. Pots stacked with no logic to it, staples in no particular order, the household account book buried under 2 months of other papers. Agnes stood in the middle of it and looked around. I'll sort as I go, she said. Supper's around 6, he said. Take whatever time you need. She had it ready at 6. A proper stew, biscuits, and a dried apple cake from a bag of windfall apples she found behind the flour sack. Cole came in from the barn and sniffed and said nothing, which she was already beginning to understand was his version of a compliment. Wade came in and said it smelled considerably better than usual, and by the emphasis he put on considerably, she gathered this was high praise. They ate at the table, all four. Agnes asked Wade about his day and let him answer without interruption, which he did at some length because he had a great deal to say about a great many things. Cole watched her listen. Hart looked at his plate more than the room, but she had the sense he was accounting for everything in it. After supper, Cole helped clear the table without being asked, which was the kind of thing that did not happen in a house where no one had thought to ask for it. She found the household account book the following afternoon and worked through 2 months of backlog and left her corrections on the kitchen table with a note explaining each entry. Hart read it that evening in the front room. 3 years of grief had made him careless with things he had once kept tight, and seeing it laid out in someone else's careful hand was not comfortable. But it was the kind of discomfort that comes from something you have needed and had not allowed yourself to look at directly. He knocked on her door before breakfast the next morning and said, "The ledger work. That was good." She said, "Ledgers are what I've got." He said, "More than most," and went to the barn. By the second week, the kitchen had its own logic. Cole started arriving for supper a few minutes earlier. Wade had stopped eating fast and started staying at the table after the meal to show Agnes things, a flat stone from the north field, a drawing of a horse that was better than it should be for an 8-year-old, the way a particular knot worked that he had been trying to learn. She looked at each thing with the full attention it deserved and gave him her honest opinion rather than a softened one. He preferred honest. She discovered that Cole had not read a book since some time before his mother died. He was precise about everything that could be approached with precision, numbers and sequence, and the proper order of tasks. But the shelf in the front room held 14 books and 12 of them had never been opened. She left one of her own on the kitchen table without comment, a westward survey history full of maps and route decisions, and the kind of systematic problem-solving that appealed to a boy who thought in systems. 2 days later it was gone. She did not see it for a week. When it returned to the kitchen table, it was face down at the section on mountain pass routes. Neither of them said anything about it. That seemed to suit them both. The man named Carver Halse arrived in Cutter Creek on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of October. Agnes heard about it from the grain merchant the following morning. Halse had been in the day before, asking questions about her. Was she reliable? Had anyone had difficulty? What did people generally think of her? She finished the afternoon ledgers and went back to the ranch and said nothing at supper. Hart had also heard, because information of a certain kind moved through a small town whether or not anyone sent it. He said nothing at supper either. That evening, after Cole and Wade were in bed, he came to the kitchen where Agnes was still at the household accounts and sat down across from her. "Halse," he said. "He's in town," she said. "What does he want?" If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She put down the pen. She had been deciding since she heard the news how much to say and to whom. Hart Dolan had given her exactly what he said he would give her, and in her experience, that placed him in a category with a small number of people. She told him, Ohio, the law firm where she had taught bookkeeping to the junior clerks. Carver Halse, who had worked there as a document manager and spent 3 years before she knew him helping himself to client accounts. She had found the pattern because she always found patterns by looking at numbers until they told her something. She had taken what she found to the senior partner. Halse had gotten ahead of it by 2 days. He told people I had been taking from the clerk's accounts, she said. He had more standing than I did, and I had less proof than I needed. And I left because staying meant spending years trying to undo a story that was already believed. She looked at the table, then at him. He followed me west because I know what he did, and he cannot afford to have anyone believe me. Hart was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know. She looked at him. You know what he did. I know you didn't take anything. His voice was level. A woman with something to hide doesn't spend her first week in a stranger's house organizing the account ledger and leaving a note explaining every correction she made. He set his hands flat on the table. I watch things. It's what I do. You knew before I told you. Before the first week was out, he said. I'll handle Halse. He was on the main street the next morning. Agnes was at the dry goods for flour and had not planned to be present. But she was at the counter when Hart came up the street with the quiet purposefulness of a man who has made a decision and is carrying it through. She saw him stop beside Carver House outside the bank, where Halse had been talking with several men from the South County Ranching Association. She could not hear the words from where she stood. She watched Halse go pale and the men around him go still, and then Hart turned and walked toward the dry goods without looking back. He came through the door and bought a pound of nails he had not intended to buy and said to Agnes, without ceremony, The county sheriff has been contacted. I told Halse as much, and I told every man standing with him what I know of the situation. He set his money on the counter. He'll be gone by Friday. Halse was gone by Thursday. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. They were something quieter than that. The ranch in its late autumn rhythm, the work continuing as it always did. Cole had started talking more at supper, not performing ease, but actually being at ease, which was different and noticeable. One evening Agnes came into the front room and found the survey history she had left on the kitchen table propped open beside Cole's lamp, with a set of maps he had been drawing himself from memory spread out next to it. He looked up at her and then back at his work. She said nothing and left him to it, because that was the right response. And she knew it was the right response because he was there again the following evening with a different set of maps and a question about scale. Hart had stopped looking at his plate and started looking at the table, at the 4 of them around it. In the way of a man who is noticing something he had stopped letting himself notice for a long time. Wade asked her one evening, while she was teaching him to read by the kitchen lamp, whether she was staying. Yes, she said. How do you know? She thought about it. Because this is the right place, she said. That doesn't happen often enough to walk away from when it does. She looked at his face. And because you asked me. I just asked you to sit with us, he said. That was enough, she said. He appeared to find this reasonable and went back to the reader. The church women came in November with a pot of beans and the general air of a reconsideration. Mabel Thatcher, who had arranged herself away from Agnes at the lunch counter in October, came through the kitchen door of the Dolan ranch and found a room that was clean and warm and smelled of bread, and found Cole at the table working through mathematics that ran well past what the county school covered. She set down the beans. She said, The boys look well. Agnes said, They are well. Mabel left, and Cole watched the door close and said, She used to talk to Wade like he couldn't understand things. Agnes said, People talk from where they understand. Sometimes that place is wrong. Cole thought about this for a moment. And then they bring beans. Usually, she said. He went back to his work. December came cold, and the ranch settled into its winter pace. Hart talked more at supper, not because he was trying to, but because there were things worth saying. The calving schedule for spring, the west fence line that needed more than patching, whether Cole was ready to take on more of the south pasture come March. Agnes had observations about all of it. She had been watching the operation for 2 months with the same attention she gave account books, and what she saw was specific and earned, and Hart listened to it the way he listened to things he respected, which was fully and without interruption. She found him in December on the small rise behind the barn, at 2 stones that stood there for Ruth and for a son who had come early and not stayed. She had come up to call the boys in for supper and stopped when she understood what she was looking at. She did not go closer. She stood at the edge of the hill in the cold until he turned, and when he found her there, she did not pretend she had come for any other reason. "Supper's ready," she said. "5 minutes," he said. She went back down without making it into anything else. She kept supper warm, and in 5 minutes he was at the door stamping the cold off his boots, and they ate, and Wade told a story about a crow and the morning's fencing that was funnier than it had any right to be in the retelling, and Cole offered a correction to one detail, and Hart listened to both of them, and the kitchen was as full as it had been in 3 winters. After the boys were in bed, Hart sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, not reading, not working, just sitting with his coffee the way a man sits in a room he is not ready to leave. Agnes was still at the accounts. Neither of them said anything about the hill. There was nothing to say that the evening hadn't already said, and both of them understood that, and understanding it together was its own kind of thing. He came to find her a few evenings after that. She was at the table with the household accounts when he appeared in the doorway, which was where he tended to stand when he had arrived at something he intended to say. "I don't want you to leave," he said, as plain as anything he had ever said to her. "The arrangement had a timeline, and I know that. But I'd like to make it permanent. Fair wage, your name on the household, your place at the table." He paused. "I'm not saying more than that tonight. That's the truth of what I'm saying." She looked at him for a moment, not because she needed more time, but because she wanted him to know she had heard it clearly. "I stopped saving toward leaving in the 3rd week," she said. "I'd like to stay." He nodded once. The next morning, he moved her coat hook from the back entry to the front rack beside Cole's and Wade's, without comment. She had kept, since she left Ohio, a small envelope in the bottom of her trunk. The money she had saved against the possibility that she would need to leave wherever she landed. In February, she took it out of the trunk and put it in the kitchen drawer with the household accounts, because that was where it belonged now. She did not make a ceremony of it. She put it in the drawer and went back to what she was doing. Hart found it in the drawer 3 days later. That evening, he set a single page on the kitchen table. The deed to the South grazing allotment, with her name written in the space that had been blank, in his careful, unhurried hand. Then he went to check the horses. She found it in the morning. She stood at the table and read it twice and put it in the drawer alongside the envelope and the household accounts, and started the coffee. Hart came in from the barn and poured himself a cup and stood at the window looking at the frost on the kitchen garden, and the February light came in low and flat and clean. "Thank you," she said. "Should have done it in October," he said. She looked at him. "What stopped you?" He took a sip of his coffee. "Wasn't sure you'd stay." "What changed your mind?" He set the cup down. "You put the ledger corrections on the table," he said. "Left a note explaining everyone." He looked out at the frost and the pale morning light. "That's not someone who's planning to go anywhere." She smiled then, the particular smile of a person whose careful reading of someone has turned out to be right. Outside, one of the early calves had come in the night, earlier than Hart had expected. He would spend part of the morning checking on her, and Cole would want to come and be useful, and Wade would make it clear in the way he made everything clear that he also intended to come, and the day would go the way days at the Dolan Ranch went, which was in no particular order that anyone had planned for, and in exactly the right order nonetheless. Agnes would have bread started before they came back in, and there would be something on the stove, and when all 4 of them were at the table at midday with cold hands and strong opinions about the calves' prospects, no one in that kitchen would need to name what it was or explain how it had come to be that way. It simply was. Upstairs, Wade's boots hit the floor hard, which was his usual mode of beginning a morning. Cole's voice said something brief in response. Both of them were on the stairs. The cold light lay across the kitchen floor, and the ranch made its ordinary sounds around them. And what had been a house that was kept and fed but quieter than it once was was quieter no longer. That had started in October, at a lunch counter, when a boy of 8 had looked at a woman eating alone and decided that was wrong and done something about it. Everything that followed, from that morning to this one, had grown from that, which was, if you thought about it, about the size of most things that matter. Not large at the start, just true. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.